The wind moved slowly across the Montana plains that morning, dragging thin lines of dust along the road like ghosts that had nowhere left to wander. It was the kind of quiet that only existed in ranch country, the deep, lonely silence that stretched farther than the eye could see. Jacob Turner had lived with that silence for nearly 15 years. At 42, the rancher had grown used to the rhythm of it. The creaking of wooden fences, the distant call of cattle, the lonely whistle of wind across open land. For most men, the quiet would have felt empty. For Jacob, it had become home. He had built his life the hard way, piece by piece, like the fences he repaired every spring. Long days, rough hands, and very few words. The small ranch outside the town of Silver Creek had once belonged to his father, and before that, his grandfather. The land was stubborn and unforgiving, but it was honest. And Jacob understood honest things. Most folks in Silver Creek described him the same way. Quiet, reliable, a good man, but distant. He went into town once a week, usually on Saturdays. Always the same routine. Feed store, hardware shop, black coffee at Martha's Diner. Then back to the ranch before sunset. People nodded to him. He nodded back. That was usually the extent of conversation. But what most people didn't know about Jacob Turner was that the quiet wasn't just around him. It lived inside him. 15 years earlier, that quiet had arrived suddenly, like a storm that never left. His wife, Emily, had died in a car accident on an icy winter road. One moment she had been laughing, promising to bake his favorite peach pie when he got back from fixing a fence line. The next moment, she was gone. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. After the funeral, Jacob had stopped talking much. The ranch became his refuge, the animals his company. The work kept his hands busy, but the nights were always long. Lonely nights. And over time, he stopped expecting life to surprise him. Until the afternoon he found the horse. It happened late in autumn. The sky was heavy with gray clouds when Jacob rode out to check the far pasture. Winter was coming soon, and he wanted to make sure the fences were strong enough to hold through the snowstorms. His old pickup bounced along the dirt trail until he noticed something strange near the edge of the property line. At first, he thought it was just a shadow against the brush. But then it moved. Jacob slowed the truck. About 30 yards off the road stood a horse. A chestnut mare. Thin, exhausted, and trembling. He stepped out of the truck slowly, careful not to spook her. The mare didn't run. That alone told him something was wrong. Most wild or stray horses would bolt the moment they saw a stranger. But this one just stood there, barely breathing. Jacob moved closer, boots crunching softly against the dry grass. That's when he noticed the blood. A long cut ran along the horse's side, deep and ugly, like she had scraped against barbed wire or broken fencing. Jacob muttered under his breath. "Damn!" He approached slowly, extending a hand. The mare flinched but didn't move away. Her dark eyes were wide with pain. Jacob had handled injured animals before. It came with ranch life. But something about the way this horse looked at him stopped him for a moment. There was fear there, but also something else. Trust. Like she had already decided he was her last chance. He gently touched the injured area to examine it. The horse jerked slightly, and a weak sound escaped her throat. Almost like a whisper. Jacob froze. For a split second, the wind carried something strange through the air. A voice. Soft. Fragile. "Don't! It still hurts there!" Jacob turned sharply. No one. Just the empty prairie. The wind moved through the grass again. He frowned, shaking his head. Must have imagined it. He focused back on the horse, and tried again to inspect the wound. The moment his hand touched the injured area, the voice came again, clearer this time. "Please don't." Jacob stepped back quickly, heart pounding. This time he knew he hadn't imagined it. Someone was nearby. "Hello?" he called out, scanning the brush. Silence. Then a faint rustling sound came from behind a cluster of sage bushes. Jacob moved cautiously toward it. What he found made him stop cold. A woman sat on the ground beside the horse. He hadn't noticed her at first because she was partially hidden by the tall grass. Her clothes were dusty, her face pale, and one arm was wrapped awkwardly against her side, as if she had been holding it there for a long time. She looked exhausted. But the moment she saw Jacob, her eyes filled with panic. "Please," she said weakly. "Don't touch her there. She's already hurting." Jacob stared for a moment. Then realization hit him. The voice. It hadn't come from the wind. It had come from her. The woman tried to stand but winced sharply and sank back down. Jacob stepped closer carefully. "You all right, ma'am?" She shook her head slightly. "Not really." Jacob crouched beside her. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought. Maybe early 30s. There was dirt on her cheeks, and her hair had come loose from its braid. But her eyes were steady, protective. Even in pain, she kept glancing toward the injured horse. "Is she yours?" Jacob asked gently. The woman nodded. "Her name's Willow." Jacob looked back at the mare. The animal's legs trembled slightly, but she hadn't moved away. "How long you been out here?" he asked. The woman hesitated. "Since yesterday morning." Jacob's eyebrows lifted. "You've been out here all night?" She nodded again. "I couldn't leave her." Jacob studied her for a moment. Something about that answer struck him deeply. Most people would have walked to the nearest road hours ago. But she had stayed. Through the cold. Through the night. Just so the horse wouldn't be alone. Jacob stood and removed his hat, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like both of you need help." The woman gave a tired smile. "That would be nice." Jacob walked back to the truck and grabbed a blanket and a small first aid kit he kept for emergencies. When he returned, the woman looked up at him carefully. "You live around here?" "Ranch about 2 miles west," he replied. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "That's good." Jacob knelt beside Willow and examined the wound more closely. It wasn't life-threatening, but it definitely needed cleaning and stitching. "Barbed wire," he said. The woman sighed. "She spooked last night during the storm and ran straight through the fence line." Jacob worked gently, cleaning the wound while the woman kept talking softly to the horse. "You're okay, girl, you're okay." Her voice had a calm strength that surprised him. The horse listened to her, trusted her. Jacob finished wrapping the injury and stood up. "All right," he said. "Next step is getting you both back to the ranch." The woman looked uncertain. "You sure?" Jacob shrugged. "Ain't exactly crowded out here. Got plenty of space." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you. Mr. Turner." "Jacob Turner." She smiled faintly. "Sarah." Jacob helped her stand. The moment she put weight on her leg, she gasped in pain. Jacob caught her before she fell. "Easy," he said firmly. "You're hurt worse than you're pretending." Sarah looked embarrassed. "Just twisted it, I think." Jacob didn't argue. He simply lifted her into the passenger seat of the truck. For a moment, Sarah looked startled. "You didn't have to." "Yeah," Jacob said quietly, closing the door. "I did." Then he turned toward the horse. Willow followed the truck willingly when he led her behind with a rope. As the sun began sinking toward the horizon, Jacob Turner drove back toward his ranch with two unexpected passengers. He had no idea yet that this moment, a wounded horse, a stranger's voice saying, "Don't, it still hurts there," would be the moment his quiet life finally began to change. And somewhere deep inside him, a part of his heart that had been silent for 15 years was beginning to wake up again. The truck rolled slowly up the long dirt road that led to Jacob Turner's ranch as the sun dipped low behind the mountains. The sky burned with shades of orange and deep crimson, stretching endlessly across the horizon. It had been years since Jacob had noticed a sunset like that. Normally he drove this road without thinking, his mind busy with chores waiting to be done. But that evening felt different. Maybe it was because the quiet beside him wasn't empty anymore. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, leaning back carefully, her injured legs stretched awkwardly in front of her. She watched the passing fields through the window, while Willow followed slowly behind the truck, tied to the hitch rail. Every few minutes Sarah turned to glance through the side mirror, making sure the horse was still there. Jacob noticed. "You check on her more than most folks check on their kids," he said. Sarah smiled faintly. "She's family." Jacob nodded slowly. He understood that more than she realized. When they reached the ranch house, Sarah looked around with quiet curiosity. The small wooden house sat at the center of the property, surrounded by old barns, weathered fences, and wide open fields. It wasn't fancy, but it was strong, built to survive storms and winters and long years of hard work. Jacob parked the truck and stepped out. "Let's get you inside first," he said. "I should help with Willow." "You should sit down before you fall over," Jacob interrupted gently. Sarah laughed weakly. He helped her out of the truck and supported her as they walked slowly toward the house. Inside, the warmth hit them immediately. A wood stove burned quietly in the corner, filling the room with the smell of pine and cedar. Sarah looked around the small living room. There were very few decorations. A couch, a wooden table, a few shelves, and one framed photograph on the wall. A woman with bright eyes and a warm smile stood beside a younger Jacob Turner in the picture. Sarah noticed it immediately. "Your wife?" she asked softly. Jacob paused. "Was?" he said quietly. Sarah nodded respectfully and didn't ask anything else. Jacob appreciated that. He helped her sit on the couch and brought her a glass of water. "I'll check on Willow," he said. Outside, the air had turned colder. Willow stood near the fence, tired but calm. Jacob led her gently into the barn and gave her fresh water and hay. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the woman inside his house. Sarah. She had arrived in his life like a sudden storm, unexpected and impossible to ignore. When he returned to the house, Sarah was staring at the photograph on the wall again. "She looks kind," she said. Jacob leaned against the doorway. "She was." Silence filled the room for a moment. Then Sarah spoke carefully. "I lost someone too." Jacob looked at her. "My husband," she continued quietly. 3 years ago." Jacob walked slowly toward the table and sat down. "Accident?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Cancer." Her voice remained calm, but the weight behind it was clear. "We had a small ranch in Colorado. Horses mostly. After you passed, everything felt too quiet." Jacob understood that feeling better than anyone. "So you left?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Sold most of the land. Kept Willow. Figured I'd travel for a while. Maybe start fresh somewhere." Jacob glanced toward the window where the barn stood in the distance. "Life's funny about fresh starts," he said. Sarah smiled gently. "Sometimes they arrive when you're not looking for them." The days that followed began slowly. Sarah stayed at the ranch while her leg healed and Willow recovered from the injury. At first, everything felt cautious and unfamiliar. Jacob continued his normal routine, waking before sunrise and working long hours. But now there was another voice around the house. Sarah helped wherever she could. Cooking, cleaning, feeding animals once her leg felt better. She spoke to the horses in the barn as if they were old friends, and to Jacob's surprise, even the stubborn ones listened to her. One evening, about 2 weeks later, Jacob returned from fixing a fence line and found something unusual. Laughter. It drifted out from the barn. He stepped inside quietly and saw Sarah brushing Willow's coat. She was telling the horse a story about a stubborn mule she once owned. Willow nudged her shoulder, as if she understood every word. Jacob leaned against the doorframe without announcing himself. For the first time in years, the barn didn't feel lonely. Eventually Sarah noticed him. "You've been standing there for 5 minutes," she said with a grin. Jacob shrugged. "Didn't want to interrupt the conversation." She laughed again. "Willow says you're welcome to join." Jacob walked closer. The horse lifted her head slightly, calmer and stronger now. "You did good," Jacob said quietly to Sarah. "She's tough," Sarah replied. "Just needed someone patient." Jacob looked at Willow thoughtfully. Then he said something unexpected. "Sounds like someone else I know." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Are you calling me stubborn?" Jacob smiled slightly. "Maybe." For the first time since Emily's death, the smile felt natural. Weeks passed. Winter crept closer. Snow began dusting the mountains, and the nights grew longer. Sarah's leg healed completely, and Willow's wound left only a thin scar. One evening, Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunset when Jacob joined her. "You'll probably head out soon," he said quietly. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out across the wide ranch fields. "I was thinking about that," she said slowly. Jacob waited. Then she turned toward him. "Truth is, I haven't felt this peaceful in a long time." Jacob felt his chest tighten slightly. "Ranch life has that effect," he said. Sarah studied him carefully. "You ever think about not being alone out here?" Jacob didn't answer right away. For years, he had convinced himself that loneliness was just part of life. But lately something had changed. The quiet didn't feel so heavy anymore. He looked at Sarah. Then at the barn where Willow rested. Then at the open land stretching endlessly beyond the fences. "Yeah," he admitted softly. "I've thought about it." Sarah smiled. "Good." Jacob frowned slightly. "Good?" She nodded. "Because I was thinking the same thing." The wind moved gently across the porch. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Sarah said something that made Jacob laugh. "You know, this whole thing started because you ignored what I told you." Jacob tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She grinned. "Back in the field." "Don't, it still hurts there." Jacob chuckled. "Yeah. Well," she said warmly, "I'm glad you didn't listen." Jacob looked out at the sunset again. 15 years ago, he had believed his life ended the day Emily died. But life had a strange way of continuing. Of surprising you. Sometimes all it took was a wounded horse, a stranger's voice in the wind, and the courage to help when someone said, "Don't." 6 months later, the town of Silver Creek gathered for a small wedding at Jacob Turner's ranch. The decorations were simple. The guests were few. But the joy in the air felt bigger than the open sky above them. Sarah stood beside Jacob in a white dress that moved gently in the prairie wind. Willow grazed peacefully nearby. And as Jacob held Sarah's hand, he realized something powerful. Kindness had brought her here. Compassion had kept her here. And love, quiet, patient, and unexpected, had built a new life where he once believed none was possible. As the ceremony ended, Sarah whispered something that made him smile. "Still hurts there?" Jacob placed a hand over his chest. "Yeah," he said softly, "but in a good way now." And for the first time in many years, the quiet of the Montana plains no longer felt lonely. It felt like home. Message of the story. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness, helping when someone says, "Don't," because they are afraid of pain, can change lives forever. Compassion has a way of healing wounds we never knew were still there.